Thank you for joining us on Idaho State of Mind, where we endeavor to educate the citizens of Idaho on the state of higher education. I'm Libby Howe. This is a production of Idaho State University, and we are proud that the majority of the show's content is created by Idaho State University students. As the state-designated provider of health professions education, Idaho State University brings us Healthy State of Mind, a segment dedicated to all things health-related. Today we look at the much-talked-about shortage of doctors across the U.S. The long-predicted physician shortage is not only here, but it is likely to worsen. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts there will be 212,000 physician openings by 2014. This is due to the growth of an aging population requiring more medical services and also the number of older physicians approaching retirement age. This number represents more than 25% of the current physician workforce. Well, this physician shortage will be starkly felt in Idaho. We rank almost last in the nation for the number of primary care physicians. How will the country meet the increasing demand for medical services? One answer lies in the training of physician assistants. Idaho State of Mind's Chris Cole has more.
Hope. That's what people feel when they enter and exit the Portneuf Medical Center Cancer Center. Patients get that feeling from their care provider, but the care given is not only from a physician, but also from a physician assistant.
Oftentimes we're referred to as physician extenders, where we simply extend the availability of a physician in terms of, if we can see a patient and thereby open that physician up to see another patient.
Physicians initially meet with a patient to work on a plan of care for the patient. Then the PA steps in to be there when the doctor is unable. PAs must renew their national certification every 6 years, just like doctors, except that PAs are not required to specialize in a field, making their knowledge base for patients much wider.
We have a very broad background, and many PAs that I've met, including my classmates, had the option to go to medical school and specifically chose to go to physician assistant school.
The PA program at Idaho State has graduated over 380 physician assistants in the last 15 years. And the reason for going into the medical field remains the same.
It's actually a very uncommon thing to be able to come up to someone and be able to touch them in a healing way, in a comforting way. And that's probably my biggest reward in what I do, is to be able to benefit that person's life.
At the PMC Cancer Center, Chris Cole, Idaho State of Mind.
And joining us today is Paula Phelps. She directs the Physician's Assistant Program at Idaho State University, and she's going to help answer some of the questions of what exactly physician's assistants do. Paula, given the doctor shortage that we have, how is it that physician's assistants can help fill the void?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it. Physician assistants, the profession has been around since the late 60s. And so because of that, there's been a lot of time for the physician assistant profession to grow and to mature. We are virtually in all niches of medicine, if you will. We can have, our graduates will be in neurology, in OBGYN, family practice, in all areas. So as far as helping with the shortages, they can be extenders to physicians who are already there, so that if you have one physician who's an OBGYN practicing solo, he or she could bring on 2 or 3 physician assistants and see 2 to 3 times the number of patients. You can also have PAs working autonomously in remote sites where there isn't a physician on site all the time. And so in those areas where there may be no coverage, someplace like Stanley, Idaho, where there's a physician assistant every day or the days that they're open, and the supervising physician only comes once a month. So there are different ways that PAs can fill the void.
So it really can make a difference and kind of help spread the MDs out a little bit more. A lot of people have probably heard the term physician assistant, and they don't quite know what that encompasses. What can a PA do?
It really depends on the state in which you practice. In Idaho, we have really fairly good Practice Act, and what we're able to do for our citizens because of that is we can do physical exams, prescribe medications, order and interpret lab tests, and really do, one of the statistics you'll hear thrown around is about 80% of what a family practice physician does. That's sort of a liberal statement, and I think it really depends on who the family physician is, but in general we can do a lot of the sort of routine and regular things that the family physician does.
That's great. So really, there can be a lot of autonomy for these PAs.
Absolutely. In Idaho, the state law says that you have to have a physician on site no less than once a month. So again, in some place like Stanley, Chalice, Salmon, they might have somebody come and review their records, see other patients who are maybe too complex, at least once a month.
Now, how much education do they need beyond a bachelor's degree? I know the ISU has the only program in Idaho, is that correct?
That's correct.
What's the program like?
It's a master's degree program. We have 550 applicants for 60 spots. It's 2 years of education, and so the first year is all in the classroom, learning diagnostic skills, learning about clinical medicine in general, and the second year is all clinical medicine out at the clinical sites, the hospitals, the ERs.
It seems like having PAs makes healthcare a lot more accessible to people. Does it also make healthcare a lot more affordable as well?
It can. For any given patient, it might not seem like it's more affordable because we're in a fee-for-service climate. So if you go and have your sinus infection diagnosed, it's going to cost you as a patient the same if it's an MD or a physician assistant who diagnosed it. However, the system as a whole is going to be paying less salary for that PA versus the MD, and so the system will have less cost to it. Another thing I wanted to mention and just really stress is how thankful we are for our preceptors who train the students in the second year of the program. It's a 100% volunteer workforce of physicians, physician assistants across Idaho who are training and giving of their time, and so I really wanted to say thank you to them.
And that really is significant, that doctors are stepping up and they're helping to make it so that we can have more PAs who are trained and educated. That's wonderful. Well, Paula Phelps, thank you so much for joining us. This is something that certainly affects all of us.
Thank you.
And in other health news, 46 million, that's the number of Americans who don't have health insurance. That's according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The challenge for many is how to avoid costly trips to the emergency room, especially during tough economic times. And Tara Smith is a physician assistant and clinical instructor at the ISU Meridian Health Science Center near Boise.
Try to exercise, limit tobacco, alcohol, try to get sleep, and try to eat as nutritious meals as you can, and then try to keep up with whatever preventive care that you may need. For women, that would be mammograms, pap smears, and dental care. Men, also prostate screening.
And doctors say gum disease can lead to heart disease. Smith urges uninsured patients to take advantage of free community health screenings and low-cost clinics, such as those offered through ISU Meridian. Identifying problems early can save you a trip to the emergency room and a hefty hospital bill. Researchers at Idaho State University warn parents to start being more aware of their children's sleep habits. ISU's Maria Wong, along with researchers at the University of Michigan, are working on a study that connects sleep problems in childhood with suicidal thoughts and actions later in life. They found that sleep factors are a strong sign for suicidal thoughts in youth, even when factoring out depression. The researchers emphasize they do not have proof that sleep problems necessarily cause suicidal thoughts or vice versa. However, there is proof of a connection. Wong believes starting a conversation about sleep problems with a child might be an easy way to transition into a more serious conversation.
It's a little difficult to initiate a conversation on depression, because not every teen is willing to talk about it necessarily. They might be sad, but they might not want to talk about it.
Parents might want to monitor their child's sleep patterns and, if they find problems, to seek help. The effects of aging can have a profound effect on a person's ability to drive safely. Often it's a loved one who first recognizes the signs that it's time to give up the keys. However, many people resist having the driving discussion with their elderly loved one. Coming up later in the show, we'll take a look at the signs that you or a loved one are losing the ability to drive safely. We'll also talk about how to start that driving discussion in a positive way. But first, the U.S. Congress has about 17% of them. They hold 22.5% of state executive and legislative positions, and yet they're about 50% of the population. We're talking about women in politics. Idaho State University is working to change these stats by hosting Elect Her. Idaho State of Mind's Elaine Washam tells us more.
A lecture was hosted on the ISU campus for another year, and the turnout may have been surprising. Both women and men gathered to learn how to run for student government. The Anderson Center brought the workshop to campus.
We had a huge turnout, and it obviously shows that people are interested in this issue. They're interested in learning more about running for office for ASISU.
Participants went through a number of exercises to help them prepare for a campaign. Here, a participant runs around campus trying to collect signatures that acted as votes in a campaign simulation.
Well, I would listen to my constituents. That would probably be the biggest thing. What kinds of things would you guys want on campus?
A Running Start board member hosted the night and helped the participants through all the activities.
Where women sat around and went, what are we going to do to get more women to run for office? And part of Running Start, our first program there, was organizing a young women's political leadership conference in Washington.
While the night was open to both men and women, the participants addressed women's issues.
Educate the women, just because then they're not forced to have that stay-at-home lifestyle, and they're not subjected to just the routines of history.
Well, I'm hoping that once people get out of college and into the real world, they'll be more likely to run for public office as women.
At the Student Union, Elaine Washam, Idaho State of Mind.
And the students also practiced elevator speeches. This was meant to teach each student to say what they stand for and about the time it takes to ride an elevator. In a world of spiraling gas prices and the depletion of finite natural resources, the race is on to find alternative forms of energy production. Idaho's 3 universities and the Idaho National Laboratory are joining forces to do just that. The collaboration is in the form of the Center for Advanced Energy Studies. Idaho State of Mind reporter Summer Giak has the story.
55,000 total square footage of the Case building is filled with offices and laboratories. This lets students and faculty work on nuclear science and engineering, carbon management, bioenergy, and modeling and simulation. In 2010, Case competed for and won about $8 million for new research, equipment, and other funding. This funding comes from the federal government through the Department of Energy, State of Idaho, and many others from private industries. After receiving the money, Case begins conducting experiments to further the proposed research. For example, Idaho State University and Case received $3.1 million to improve solar energy by working on the precision of nanoparticles.
The students are the major focus of the ISU part of this whole activity. And we're very interested in making sure that the students are working on things that are practical and that have a potential for making a difference.
The National Laboratory and the 3 institutions in Idaho make Idaho a prime place for research.
The longer term benefit is that we're working on things that matter to the country.
At the Case building, Summer Giak, Idaho State of Mind.
The Center for Advanced Energy Studies also has a unique research and learning tool. Imagine a 3-dimensional computer screen that you are in and can actually interact with. It's called the CAVE, a computer-assisted visual environment. It uses a LiDAR scan, which bounces light off objects and records them. The Center for Advanced Energy Studies has partnered with Idaho universities, including ISU, to receive a mini CAVE. Practical applications include scientists exploring and interacting with advanced test reactors. Medical students or doctors can take a closer look into MRIs. The CAVE is also used for geology. One can see the magnitude of recent earthquakes. It is also a tool that helps engage future students.
It's a tool that engages the youth to look into careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Idaho State University is interested in finding new and interesting ways to use this powerful resource. As new technologies meet the nation's energy needs are created, it opens up another need for people who know how to fix and maintain these new systems. As of March 2011, Idaho State will be offering a new program. It's called the Renewable Energy Technology, and it will prepare technicians to work on everything from windmills to solar panels. The classes for this program will be offered online to students statewide, with weekend and summer laboratory exercises held on the ISU campus. The technical program will teach students how to maintain the renewable energy technologies of the future.
The program itself is, as I say, is designed for people who are looking for new careers, or people who perhaps have an interest in pursuing a technical career who currently aren't in one, and it's designed to be more accessible.
This includes technologies for wind, solar, hydro, and geothermal power, and the admissions process is currently underway. Idaho State University's nuclear engineering program has boomed in recent years for both undergraduate and graduate students. The engineering building houses a nuclear reactor that is one of only 3 of its type in the nation. Recently, there has been resurgence in the nation's interest in nuclear power. With the Idaho National Laboratory nearby, ISU students have ample opportunities for internships and possible jobs after graduation.
There's always been a strong nuclear emphasis and component, and a strong collaboration with Idaho National Lab, which is really one of the main reasons why the nuclear is here and not at Boise or not at U of I.
In 2005, the nuclear engineering program only had 7 students enrolled. Well, that number has increased significantly to 90 students. Energy research and medical breakthroughs are converging at ISU. Currently, doctors are able to use more than their trained medical eyes to examine patients. Medical isotopes allow doctors to image parts of the human body from the inside. Well, at ISU's Idaho Accelerator Center, they're developing ways to produce medical isotopes using accelerators, and that's instead of reactors.
Our effort is to make certain isotopes that are not available in the U.S. today, or not in enough abundance, with accelerators, and open a new window, a new tool for supplying physicians with isotopes. If we succeed, the U.S. will have a stable, reliable supply of this and other very important species of isotopes for medicine.
If successful, this could be of great benefit to the medical community. Every year, medical isotopes are used for about 20 million medical procedures. Well, have you had the talk, not with your children, but with your parents? As the elderly population rises, more and more people have voiced their concerns about elderly parents and their driving privileges. Chris Cole has the story.
In this day and age, there are drivers of all types with different ideas of what to do when driving. We all know there are safety hazards to driving, but what if the safety hazard is your parent or grandparent? I spoke with one elderly driver who may not be quite ready to give up his keys or, in a sense, his independence. I'm here with Corwin Ames, who's going to be taking me along for a short drive into town. After an uneventful and pleasant trip, he spoke about his ability to drive after he suffered a stroke in 2008.
But I drove for 8 years in England on the wrong side of the road. I drove in Japan. I feel pretty confident driving, but then again, like I say, I'm a little spastic, and sometimes I turn a corner and I don't know where I'm at.
Ames has been driving for over 60 years and still feels that even if he gets confused, his ability to drive remains intact. This discussion is becoming all too common among family members. Many people find it difficult to approach the subject in a way that helps elderly drivers feel they are being reasoned with, not talked down to.
It's a hard thing to give up, and I'm sure that I'll probably be in that same boat too, because you want to be able to go where you want to go when you feel like you need to go.
Marshall organized as well as attended a We Need to Talk seminar, which was hosted at Idaho State University in December of 2010. Marshall says that she wished she had approached the subject differently with her own mother. She wanted to tell her mother, who has since passed away, that she understood what a hardship not driving would be for her. As for Mr. Ames, he realized what could possibly happen if it became more common for him to be confused and lose focus while driving.
You know, I was born and raised in this town. I think there's not a street I haven't been up and down, but it's really an odd feeling to turn a corner and not know where you're at. But if it happens more and more, I think I'll quit driving.
This is the time where the kids need to turn to the parents and say, "We need to talk." In Pocatello, Chris Cole, Idaho State of Mind.
The decision to have the talk with an elderly loved one can be difficult. How do you know when it's the right time, and how do you bring up the subject? Well, joining us today is Dr. Ted Peterson. He is an occupational therapist professor at Idaho State University. He's here to answer some of those questions for us. Dr. Peterson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
What are some of the signs that an elderly driver maybe should not be driving anymore?
Well, you know, first of all, let's say age is not a sign. There are people in their 90s who are driving very safely and very well, so we don't want to think about eliminating somebody's driving privileges just because they're of an advanced age. But actually, when their driving performance decreases, that's when you might want to be concerned. So things like where they've become maybe a little bit irritated with driving. They think all the other drivers are doing things bad, or people are honking their horns at them for no reason. You know, those are definitely signs. Or just when they start to become so focused on one aspect of driving that they're inattentive to other factors. So they may miss traffic signs or may miss what's going on around them with the rest of the traffic.
How long should you wait before you have this discussion? People would like to wait as long as possible, I know. They just don't want to bring it up.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I think it's an emotionally difficult task to have that talk, and so that's a factor. And plus, driving is important for people, and you don't want to prematurely limit that either. So those are both factors. But I think, you know, what you need to base your decision on what you observe. So if you are observing serious problems in someone's driving, you really need to talk right away with that person and to take some kind of action.
Okay. When you do have that discussion, I would think the fact that you have driven with them, you've observed what they're doing, would make a big difference in that, how that discussion goes.
Well, I think that's true. You know, if you're going to talk to someone about their having decreased driving skills, you really should have some ammunition. You should have some basis for doing that. And the best way really is to have ridden with that person and observed over time how their driving skills perhaps have changed, or small errors that maybe don't make too much of a difference individually, but that start to add up to serious concerns.
Driving is important to different people for different reasons. I would think it would be important to know their attitudes about driving before you go into that conversation. How does the attitude a person has about driving change the conversation you have with them?
Well, I think that the emotions that a person invests into that driving task are really very important to consider for that. You know, for some people, a car is just a way to get from one place to another. And for those people, a conversation about stopping driving can be really very matter of fact and just based on what arrangements are going to be made for that person to get where he or she needs to go. But, you know, a lot of guys, especially guys my dad's age, you know, that are in their 80s, pushing 90s, have grown up in an era where they've had a love affair with automobiles. And it's very different for them. There are issues of status that might be involved with that. And the conversation has to be very different because it has to consider those effects, and your ultimate plan for that person has to consider some of those status issues, or how to replace the joy that they get with washing the car, perhaps, or something like that.
Okay. Does the conversation go better or worse depending on who talks to the person about it? I mean, should you choose this strategically?
Well, I think so. You know, there are some statistics about who would be the best person to say that, and most married people say that if they have to have that kind of a talk, they would like to have it come from their spouses. But a real significant percent, like 15% or so, say their spouse is the last person that they want to hear from. So it really is very individual, and it comes from knowing the person and knowing who in the family has the relationship with that person to be empathetic and to be credible and to really be the most effective one to talk to them.
A lot of people would prefer maybe if it's the police officer that tells their parent that they can't drive anymore, but that's the last person they want to hear it from generally.
That's right. Yeah.
So maybe it's good to have that conversation a little bit before that. Is there anything that loved ones can do to make the transition easier? So you've had the conversation. What can you do so that they don't feel like their freedom has been completely taken away?
Well, one of the things is to really have thought out what the effects of stopping driving are going to be on that individual, and to have tried to make whatever arrangements there are. You know, so we talked about, you know, just getting from place to place, but also replacing some of those emotional things too. You know, people feel like they're losing their freedom or their spontaneity. So if there's a way that you can find for them to continue to make spontaneous decisions and still have some transportation arrangements, you know, that's great, and that should be part of that conversation.
And I think
as well.
that would make the decision a lot easier for an elderly person to give up their keys. Dr. Ted Peterson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that is all for this episode of Idaho State of Mind. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please join us next time. Thank you.